Hey everyone, it's Christopher Swan, and welcome to this week's episode of Living Your Journey. Each week, I have this amazing opportunity to chat with people that love what they do in life. They understand their passions and their direction. Maybe it's a career path or the social impact that they're making. It's kind of like they're following their North Star, but they know their story may change and they understand that they're on their journey every day. On the show this week, I chat with Jake Heilbrunn. Jake's story starts as he begins college. He's overcome by this wave of anxiety and depression, and he doesn't know how to move forward with his path. He then sets on a journey to Central America to explore the world, but really himself. So Jake and I talk candidly about feeling lost and searching for more, even at Jake's early age in life. He knew something wasn't right for him, and he needed to figure it out. We talk about his adventure, who he met, why it matters, and how he's sharing his experiences with others, because maybe he can help others not go through what he experienced. Jake just released a book capturing his journey, and he can be seen talking at various schools and venues in the US. I have to say, I walk away impressed. It takes bravery and wisdom to seek out your why, especially at a young age. I also think Jake's ideas are solid and smart, and it was such a pleasure getting to know him and stepping into his world. Okay, everyone, let's meet Jake. Jake, it's great to have you on the show today. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we were just talking about this, and I think you have this really interesting story. So I'm going to jump right into all this, what your story is, because the piece I'm talking about is you left college to backpack through Central America. And as I read it somewhere, it was more of this like soul searching journey. So I want to jump in with this question of why take a trip like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny, I'm reading a book right now called The Happiness of Pursuit by this guy, Chris Gilbo, who I really like. And
yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah, awesome. And he talks about a lot of these kind of purpose-driven quests, and the thing that almost all of them have in common is they stem from some sort of discontent. And when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this really explains my story. So mine really started about 2 years ago. I was starting my freshman year at Ohio State University, and a couple days after arriving at school, I broke out in hives and rashes like all over my legs and arms. And they were really aggravating. I didn't really know what was causing them. And unfortunately, almost every day I kept breaking out. And I saw like doctors and immunologists, dermatologists. I had, all the pills and creams and tests. And they didn't really know what was wrong. So they diagnosed me with a chronic skin condition called chronic urticaria, which is just like a fancy name for saying your skin's freaking out. And yeah, like during this time, I developed severe anxiety. Anxiety was kind of like I never really, luckily, had to go. I never really experienced anxiety up until this point, and it became, this awful feeling where I felt like this ball was like rolling up in my throat, and I would be at a loss for words. Almost feel like a cat got my tongue, like I just couldn't speak. Like hypersensitive, and the frustrating thing was part of it was because the skin, I didn't know if one hive would turn into 30, but it was like I didn't know what was causing it, and I was working hard in school, getting good grades, on the outside, everything looked great, but I was really unfulfilled by what I was doing. And for whatever reason, this thought of traveling and experiencing another way of life kept popping into my head. And the second semester, I kind of wanted to go on it the first semester. This is actually something I haven't told many people, is the first semester I actually quit, or I canceled all my classes and dorm stuff for the second semester to go on this trip. And a week before the semester ended, I freaked out and uncanceled everything because I was so scared to deviate away from this path. Like I grew up and was lucky enough to go to a great high school, and, college was sort of the next step. And no one I knew was taking a leave from school. Like everyone was just going straight away to 4 years. So I canceled everything, and then I came back to school, and on the first night back was the national championship football game, and Ohio State was in it. And for the listeners who don't know, Ohio State football is like a religion. It's a huge deal there. And they won, and everyone went crazy. It was like this madness, thousands of people partying, celebrating. I remember waking up the next day just feeling absolutely miserable, because like I had all these messages too from friends and family like congratulating me, and I was kind of painting this perception that I was really happy in an environment surrounded by people who seemed to have this love for a school that I wanted nothing to do with. And I ended up seeing this career counselor who asked me a couple questions that kind of changed my life. So that day I woke up and I had never really missed class. Like I was always a good, that guy who never missed class. But it almost felt like I had a weight on my chest waking up. It was one of the worst mornings. And I like saw this career counselor. I got the last appointment with her that day. And I had seen her a couple times the first semester. She kind of let me just open up. She created basically a safe place for me to reveal, my emotions. Like as a young male in a college environment, I hid everything I was feeling. So I trusted her, and she, it turned into therapy essentially. She was just someone I could talk to. And then so she was familiar with my anxiety, my skin condition, and my desire to travel. And so she asked me two questions. And first she says, what is the worst thing that could happen if you pursue your dream of travel and take a leave from school? And, I thought about it and I realized that I had just blown this idea out of proportion, that for whatever reason, I was going to become this huge failure. I would never, ever get a job. No one would ever hire me. I just probably live on the streets forever. Like, and of course,
that's so natural, though, by the way. I think so many of us do the what if game. And we always go to like the worst scenario versus let me just look at this for what it is right this moment.
Yeah, exactly. And so I learned that it's actually, there's a word for it. It's called catastrophizing, which I didn't know at the time. And it's where we take this idea. But so when I voiced that aloud to her, I was almost laughing because like what you just said, like I had gone to such this deep what if, like probably unrealistic, that when I said it aloud to her, it was almost funny. Like I almost felt embarrassed saying it. But that was one of the most powerful questions, and I still like ask myself today when making decisions, because like when you vocalize it, it lets you see it at face value for what it really is. And so then I said that, and I got that off my chest, and I could see it for what it is. Like there were potential downsides, but being realistic about it as opposed to blowing it out of proportion. And then she says, "Okay, you've thought about the worst. Now, what is the best thing that could happen?" And like it was in that moment when I took the time to think about it. And again, I just imagined myself like traveling and living with this local family and meeting travelers from all over the world. Like it just lit me up. And I realized in that moment, like that was what I wanted to do. And I remember looking her in the eyes and I said, I'm going to do it. I'm leaving school and I'm going to travel. And so that was that. And I came home a couple days later, and then I started researching for the trip. But those two questions really mobilized me to take action.
Let me ask this, because I think about it's powerful, and I love those questions, by the way. I love that she asked you that kind of information. What I'm curious about is, so you had this anxiety, and I know that enough people that work through anxiety that it's not always like pinpoint. You can't always say it's this one thing, and I know it can feel vague sometimes. So I'm not going to ask you like what exactly was making you feel anxious, but why a trip? Why travel? Like, why was that the answer for you to go somewhere? Like, why seek that out?
Yeah, so for whatever reason, like even before I got to college, that was like always what I really wanted to do. And like, it's fascinating. It was just kind of like a gut feeling. Like it was hard for me to articulate. Like it was just something that excited me. And when I even thought about it, like I felt my heart pounding and like adrenaline like coursing through me. Like it just was something that called out to me. I guess some people just all they want to do is paint or take photos or surf. And like for me, like this idea of just traveling was so like I've always been curious and fascinated by how other people live. Like I'm very into like psychology and like why people do certain things. And I feel like travel, like all I knew is this one culture. And that was part of the reason I ventured from San Diego to Ohio State. Like people are always like, what the heck would you leave San Diego for Ohio for? But I was fascinated. It was the Midwest culture is different than West Coast culture. I was fascinated by sports. And so, but I realized that what I was seeking was drastically different. And the journey, so I ended up, researching. And for me, the trip was about experiencing different ways of life. That was what I wanted out of travel. And it wasn't like I was aware of it when I was setting out, but it was definitely like a journey of self-discovery. Although like when I left I left from the journey on a very confused state. And I guess I should explain that I did research and I found an opportunity to teach English and soccer in Guatemala through a site called Workaway, which like connects volunteers and travelers from around the world. And I basically sent the dude an email saying I'm like 18 and didn't really have any professional skills, but I wanted to make a difference. And I suggested those two, and he said, "Great, come on over." And yeah, for me, the trip was also about kind of being present and like really like the trip was for me. Like it felt like almost like a healing journey now looking back, because I actually didn't bring my phone. I just packed a small backpack. And I didn't bring my phone because that day, the day after the national championship, I kind of I posted an Instagram picture portraying the celebration, and I realized like I was kind of comparing myself to all these other people through their social media profiles.
Sure, it's so many people do that. I think that's a little bit of a trap that we get into. Could I even just say, I don't want to like belabor the point, but I think I really do get it. It's this. So I think I love what you're saying. Like hindsight, you could say, oh yeah, I could see it was like this healing thing, or it was when I look back, it was almost like you wanted to shake things up. Is that kind of true? Like you're like, this just isn't working. I need to do something a little bit different. I know travel's going to be, I don't know what the answers are, but I know I need to shake it up and go toward this thing that is attracting me to see where it takes me. Is that a little bit of it?
Absolutely. And it's funny you said that, because I think we all have influences in our life that really shape us, and sometimes it's hard to realize what it was.
Yeah.
And so my dad went to like an Ivy League school, and he was kind of, pressured to pursue a certain path. He always wanted to be like a writer and architect, but he ended up going to med school and worked basically a job he hated for like 20 plus years. And when I was 11, I came home from school, and my dad, I learned he quit his job, and he has like what is called the major depression syndrome, and he'd kind of had bouts his whole life, but he didn't get out of bed for like a month. And, I was 11, I didn't notice it too much, but, for the past like 8 or 9 years, he still hasn't really been working too much. And, my parents ended up splitting up, and, a lot happens, like life happens, right?
Sure.
But I think subconsciously, like seeing my dad and his unhappiness from like pursuing something that he didn't believe in. And, there's this powerful quote from Dr. Steve Maraboli that really, I remember seeing this in school one day on Twitter. I didn't read his book. I just saw it on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And it just I froze in my tracks. He says, if you fuel your journey on the opinions of others, you are going to run out of gas. And I felt like my dad definitely ran out of gas, and felt like I was starting to too. And so I knew it wasn't just about, it was definitely about shaking things up, but it was about taking the leap of faith to pursue the thing that called out to me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And, it definitely was shaking things up, but it was, of course, to take that leap was the hardest decision I've ever had to make. And, it took me 5-6 months, and, canceling everything and uncanceling it and then doing it again to get there. So it's definitely a process.
When you thought about, just traveling and taking a trip, did you know that it was Central America, or was it about this opportunity you found that you just said, hey, this sounds like the right fit and I can participate, I can do these things? Because I'm curious about how you ended up there, because I also know that you traveled, I think, throughout Central America and had different experiences. So I'm kind of interested about, was it the opportunity, and then what brought you into other locations as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And my honest answer is there wasn't like a specificity to it. I was actually first planning on going to Southeast Asia. I was drawn to sort of like more developing nations. I didn't want to go to like England or like Spain. I wanted to go to, something more teetering towards a developing nation. So, and also the cool thing about like Latin America and Southeast Asia is, it's a lot cheaper than here. So I had like under $4,000 saved up from work. And, I didn't know how long I wanted to travel. So I knew I was going to be purchasing like a one-way ticket because I didn't want to like limit myself. And then, I had seen a documentary about like people living on $1 a day in Guatemala. And I'd always wanted to speak Spanish. I'd played soccer for 14 years. And of course, soccer is really popular. And I read a book about another guy who kind of went on a similar journey. And he started in Guatemala called Into the Wind, the book is called. And I just, was browsing through that site called Workaway, and that one out of all the profiles I saw popped out to me the most. And I think because it was so general, like I mentioned, I was 18, I didn't really have like professional skills. I wasn't like a carpenter, so I felt like it was open ended, and I was like, perfect. Like I can just work really hard in whatever way possible.
Mm-hmm. So from there, because I know that your story. Well, how long were you traveling altogether?
Yeah, so I was gone for just under 4 months.
Well, that's quite a bit of time, though, still, when you think about it. Like, just think about, like, if you're going all over. So, obviously, we're not going to go through the entire trip, but I'd love to know, like, yeah, what was some of your initial experience going over there with this opportunity? And then, yeah, how did you go on to something else or try something else?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny how it started. The guy who was like the host of the profile. This was a town in the north of Guatemala, about like 9 hours away from the airport. So it was pretty rural.
So super close.
And
yeah, easy to get to.
Yeah, just like hop on the train. Yeah,
yeah.
No. So it's kind of funny. Like even looking back, I don't totally get. I mean, I was brilliantly and youthfully naive.
That's so smart. Actually, sometimes it's better not to know everything.
Yeah, and it's so funny. So this guy, I didn't know, like totally know. I knew he was a vet, but like a total badass. I mean, he spent 8 years in the special forces doing hostage raid and recovery. Like, just to give you the type of person he is. Like, I remember we were talking, and like at one point he was like thinking of walking to Mexico, to Cancun, which was like, he's like, yeah, I've walked from Afghanistan to Syria. Like, it will be fine. I'm like, that's what the type of guy he is. Okay?
That's intense. Yeah.
So like when we, finally talk, and then I remember like we Skyped really quick, and then I booked my flight that left in a month. He literally sends me like a 3-line email about how to get to this town. And it's like, when you get to Guatemala, take a taxi to the bus station, then buy a 9-hour ticket to this town, then take a taxi here. And because, there's no Wi-Fi except in this little cafe, the homes have no addresses. So just ask for Chris the Gringo.
And that's a great description.
And I get lost like everywhere. Like I'm so bad with directions. And I was just like, okay. Like I said, I was almost so naive that like I was like, oh, like this is just how people get around in Guatemala. Like I'll figure it out. And so getting to this town was like I could have written a book about the first 2 days. I mean, we got stuck on the side of this road for 8 hours just because there was like an accident way up ahead. And so this was like one of the kind of the first lessons that really opened my eyes is the people were so like unflustered. And I remember thinking like if this was the US, people would have been freaking out, like threatening to sue the bus driver, how they were going to be late to all these appointments. And just seeing how like the people just kind of took it in stride. Like everyone was just hanging out on the side of the road, like for as far as you could see, in both in front of you and behind you. Mm-hmm. Like we were on a one-way road in what felt like the middle of nowhere. And I remember thinking, okay, like this is a great time to talk to people, but I didn't really know like how, because I didn't speak Spanish other than hola, gracias, and like a couple other words. And so I had brought a soccer ball in my backpack, and I had the idea that I would go pump it up and start juggling it and seeing if some of the guys or people would be interested. And that's exactly what happened. Some people just started kicking it around with me. And that's kind of how I made a couple of friends. And then we started using, broken language and body language really to communicate. And so that was a powerful first lesson, because throughout my journey, not that I always had a soccer ball, but like I learned also the power of smiling. I mean, so many times, like I just didn't, like, especially in the beginning, I just didn't know what I was doing and couldn't speak it. So I would just like smile, and the energy you carry, not from a verbal standpoint, I realized like how powerful that is. So it made me really focus on that. But after getting to the town, so I get to the town like the next day, finally find this guy. And then they're like, yeah, so him and a couple volunteers, and we're going to go on this 6-day, 75-mile trek through the jungle, through the ancient Mayan civilizations of El Mirador, where, and essentially I had never camped before. But like, I was like, yeah, okay, like I would love to come. I wasn't going to say no. I didn't really know what I would have done not going to them.
You've already had this adventure of not being able to talk to anybody and, showing up on buses. So why not?
Yeah, like it was very, spontaneous in certain ways. And I'm not one of those guys who just is like, yeah, like, saying yes to everything. Like I'm very like punctual and, always plan things. So but that was part of what this was about. Like for me, like I'd always planned things, and I needed to kind of get out of the confines of a system, and I needed to kind of test how things work and let go of my need to have things figured out. So that was like a big part of the trip for me, was just being open to life more. And of course, we had an incredible experience, and one of the most powerful for me. So towards the end of this trek, it was really hot, hiking a lot, some days 15, 20 miles. I had an awful heat rash. And like I'd mentioned, my skin, I have sensitive skin. And while the chronic hives and things really started to go down before I left on my trip, because I saw a holistic doctor and changed my diet. And, looking back, in hindsight, the gift of hindsight, the skin stuff was essentially a manifestation of this internal disconnect. So it was like the anxiety and stress was manifesting in a skin condition for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I now I know, but I didn't know there was anything from this mind-body connection. And so, interestingly enough, a couple of days before I left on the trip, my skin really started to clear up. And so I've known the importance of, living a life true to myself is, when you hear that, sometimes it can be cheesy, but like, it's something I take pretty seriously, because if I don't, like, I see what happens. Like, my body freaks out and I can't ignore it. So that was like a pretty powerful lesson in hindsight. But to kind of tie back to the story, I was in the jungle, and I had this awful heat rash on my legs, like really uncomfortable. And I was kind of just in a miserable mood. We had like another 30 miles to trek. And I was just annoyed that I had the skin stuff could never escape. And, why didn't no one else was dealing with it? And then the guide on our trip, who was taking care of the mules that were carrying like our backpacks and food and water, he like saw my legs, he saw my shorts rolled up, and he like pointed to them and then tied up the mules to a tree and went in the brush and came back with these purple leaves and like put some water on it and mushed it up and basically squeezed this juice onto my legs. And like, to be completely honest, I don't think it did anything. Like, it was like plantas medicinales, which is like, medicinal plants. But it was like, it was this a turning moment for me, because a turning point, because it was like the fact that he went out of his way to like do something for me, like it just switched something in my mind. And I totally like changed my mindset and viewed this, like I was like, wow, I'm so grateful to be in the jungle, in the situation. Yeah, there's nothing I can do about it, so might as well just enjoy the time I have here. And so there was something about him like showing that he like cared about me was just like a huge shift. And then I ended up really enjoying the last 2 days, even in spite of all the skin stuff I was going through. So that was like a pretty eye-opening moment for me.
When you reflect back now, even to where you were, starting in college and those moments, or even before that when you were in high school and stuff, can you look at these moments and say, like, you needed this different scenery or different experiences to help you appreciate those things? Because, we can see kindness and other gestures like that too, in our everyday, no matter what we're doing. But it almost sounded like you, like we were talking about, like you had to shake things up and follow this calling. But it was almost like, I'm wondering if it was able, like maybe, was it a change for you that you needed just to be able to see some of that stuff and to be able to appreciate what you're experiencing?
Absolutely. I think you nailed it on the head. And that's something like I'm really passionate about, and something that I have a feeling I'll be doing in the next couple of years. I'm not sure what it will be, but is finding a way to help other young kids travel. And of course, like if someone doesn't want to travel, like I wouldn't want to make them travel. But I think the reality is a lot of kids want to, and, for whatever reasons they don't. But like for me, it gave me this perspective, and, this travel wasn't about staying in exotic resorts and, partying all night. Like it was really just to experience other ways of life. And I think doing that and having these experiences, like I got really sick in the jungle one night. I was sleeping on a piece of plastic, basically, with a blanket and a broken mosquito net dangling over me, like on the hard ground. And I got really sick one night, and one of the worst nights ever. I thought I was going to die. I was a helicopter going to come in and save me. Like this was really my thoughts, like a fever, and I had the stomach runs. And like literally nights like that, like now I go to bed some nights, and I'm like, wow, like how lucky I am to have a bed and a pillow. Sure. And like warmth. I mean, it's so having those rough experiences. And I think there's also something to be said about, being in nature too. Like, thousands of people and, philosophers have written about nature, and, scientists are now proving that it can, have mental benefits. but like being in nature and having some of these rough experiences just like open up your perspective, or they at least opened up mine and gave me this greater sense of appreciation for the things that I have, living in a first world Western country. Like, I think it's not that a lot of kids are entitled. I think, of course, some young people are entitled. Like, that's just part of being young.
Sure.
But I think a lot of it is just maybe a lack of knowing what you have. And I think, until you get out there, it's like hard to know. It's not like anyone's fault, but I think traveling just fosters that understanding and also gives you this perspective of how other people are living. And in return, I mean, if you look at some of the people who've created impact in lives of millions of people, like Adam Braun with Pencils of Promise and Craig Kielburger with We and Free the Children, like these guys created massive movements that are changing millions of lives, and it stemmed from their experiences traveling. So I think it's just so powerful.
Sure, it breeds awareness, and it sounds like you really want to be able to foster that desire to find more awareness in your life. I'm curious about this anxiety piece. I'm going to go back to that because I think that's a really powerful thing, because so many people suffer from anxiety and depression. And, here's the thing that I thought was really interesting. So you have this anxiety when you're in school, and I get all that too, because it could be also really overwhelming and you're on a path that maybe you don't really know that you want to be on. You want to see something different, have a different awareness. Then you go to these spaces which are the opposite of your comfort zone. They're not planned. You don't speak the language. Did you have any sort of anxiety there as well? Or did you find that it shifted? Now, I know you maybe had anxiety for a different reason, but I'm just curious about what kind of realization did you have through all these experiences and being pushed out of your comfort zone completely?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I think for me, like we kind of mentioned before, it was a generalized anxiety at school. Mm-hmm. And something that I did a lot, like, being diagnosed with a chronic anything is like kind of a sinking feeling. And I remember I started to question like the why in almost every aspect of my life for months. Like I was like, why is this happening to me? I kind of first went through this like hopelessness, and then I was like, what is the purpose of my life? Like I started really questioning things. And I think like with anxiety, especially when you can't pinpoint it, that's sort of like a common theme with a lot of people I've spoken with. But the beauty of questioning in the why and things is you do, I think, kind of scrape away at the sculpture and get closer to the center. Is it kind of allowed me, it wasn't like an overnight realization, but, over time through asking, like I realized my anxiety was just stemming from, like, I was working hard in school. I was a Dean's List student. And even that was like, I was like, okay, I could work so hard and do everything right and make all these other people happy. And internally I would be miserable. Sure. And so for me, like that was the big thing. And I think like, having the context of like seeing my dad growing up and what he went through, like the anxiety for me just really was stemming from a disconnect between how I was living. And so even like when I was traveling abroad, a lot of people were like, how can you be? So I've written a post for Psychology Today, and this one guy was pretty upset. He's like, how can you even tell anyone? Like I wasn't trying to tell anyone, and I still today don't want to tell anyone. I just want to share my experience. But I think people wonder, like, how can you, if you are anxious and have severe anxiety, how can you do something like that? And of course, everyone has a unique experience, and some things work for some people, not others. But mine was just that the traveling was what felt right to me. So even from something like getting to this town, which might have given a lot of other people anxiety, like I felt like I was guided by a knowingness within me that like made me feel at peace with everything. So although externally you might consider some of the things as crazy or this jungle thing, anxiety arousing, like it was just what I wanted to be doing. And that is where I found my internal peace.
Well, I actually think it actually makes a lot of sense. And that's why I wanted to kind of, have you go a little bit deeper on that, because anxiety, it's so interesting that, and I'm so not an expert at this. So if I say anything wrong to anybody who's listening, don't judge me. But what I keep hearing about anxiety too, it affects people in different ways. And like you said, this is why I asked about your comfort zone. You're being pushed out of your comfort zone when you're traveling, but it's not like it's what you kind of wanted to do though, versus almost the anxiety that you were experiencing before. This general anxiety though was about going to a place you didn't want to go. it was a path you didn't want to go on because you felt like there was something different, something more that you needed to uncover. You had to find out the why. But it's like you were traveling, you were on the why travel. You were on the discovery. No matter how crazy or intense it could be, that's actually what you were looking for. So it's like your anxiety didn't stem from the uncomfortable. It stemmed from the being forced into something that didn't feel right. I don't want to like psychoanalyze you or anything, but it almost rings true. And I'm like, oh, I get that. I really get that, because it's an awful feeling to be living a life that doesn't feel right to you, or doing something you're just like, this just doesn't click. I don't feel passionate about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you absolutely nailed it on the head. And something that I even thought about, and of course, like, seeing my dad too, is if you look at some of these statistics about people who are dissatisfied with their jobs. I mean, I remember getting kind of the whole spiel, like, college is going to be the best 4 years of your life. And I actually found that sort of like depressing, because I was like, wait, so you're telling me I'm about to have the peak of my life and then it's all downhill from here?
What a great way to turn that around.
Like, I mean, maybe that's my problem from seeing it that way. But I'm like, I mean, there's really this culture, and it really is present in a lot of colleges and even business going forward. I heard this guy speak in a club. Like, it's this live for the weekend mentality.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not speaking to everyone. There are kids who are completely engaged and love what they're doing, but I was definitely in a crowd where, like, I was a big partier. I couldn't wait for the weekends. I was like, work hard in the week, and on the weekend, burn the brain cells that you work so hard to create during the week, and forget about this unfulfilling reality that we're all living in, so we can escape. And like, it just didn't make sense to me. And then looking towards the future, like the Deloitte survey index shows, like 8 out of 10 people are dissatisfied with their jobs. I mean, that to me is ludicrous. Like, what? And I think it starts because no one ever questions the path. No one ever like takes the time to maybe take a year or two off from that gap from high school, or even when you're older. Like, you could be 40 or 50 and like take the time to question, like, what do you consciously want to create in your life? And I think the beauty of my anxiety, and I think the beauty of discontent, is that it gets you to question and see things from a different way. And if you add a little inspiration to the content and tie it to a greater meaning, you can create a greater purpose and quest for yourself. And that, I think, is what happened with me.
Yeah, it's very much what people would consider almost like that leap year they're taking. It's interesting too. I think that the timing that it struck you in college was, I bet you're not alone. I mean, and you probably know this. There's probably a lot of people when you first start something like that. It could be college or something else, but I think especially at that time, that's when there's so much pressure on youth of that age to know what you're doing, because you have just signed up for these courses. You have to pick a major. You got like all these things that you're gonna have to do, and that can feel really heavy. So I could see why you would, feel that at that moment and say, "Gosh, wait." But for you to even realize it, to say, hey, I don't want to do this right yet. I got to go figure this out first. I mean, that's powerful. That's, not everybody does that, or maybe not everybody sees the means or the options to do it. I'd love to jump into a little bit, just even further into your story about, because we keep talking about the anxiety and just the things that were maybe, I would almost call it like the stumbling block, but almost like the detour, like the positive detour you took into this trip and this kind of journey. Going, like, kind of completing the journey and going through all these different travel, meeting, I can't only imagine that you probably met just some really wonderful people. Afterwards, like, I'm really kind of curious about, like, what did you step away out of there that answered kind of the big why or the big aha for you that you were sort of looking for, or just vaguely knowing that you needed to go towards something?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. For me, I remember towards the end of my trip, I remember sitting on this beach in Costa Rica, and at this point I've had all these experiences, and my recent plans kind of fell to waste, and then I ended up having a great experience that resulted of those plans going to crap. And I remember sitting on the beach this night, and I felt like unbelievably, it was like one of the most rare moments of my life where I felt absolutely at peace with myself. And it, like, kind of, I think you sort of framed this in the question, but I felt like I had found the answers that I was seeking. And it's not like I set out on the journey with like 8 questions. Like, it was just like I felt internally at peace, and I knew it was time for me to come home. Mm-hmm. And I forget, what was kind of the second part of your
Oh,
question?
well, and it plays right into that. So if you felt at peace, what was it that not just made you feel at peace, but now what? Because you were on this path before, you were in school to learn specific things. And so you took this journey, felt more at peace, but what did it give you other than the peace? Like, did you know now what your next steps were and what you were supposed to be studying or doing in your next steps?
I did, and to kind of rewind a little bit, and so also to kind of frame it from a higher perspective, I really left this journey in a very kind of a darker place. Like from the 2 months between when I came home from school and left, like those were not a smooth 2 months. I tried to leave as soon as possible. I made a conclusion at one point that I was going to go on the trip no matter what, even if my skin stuff wasn't going to heal, and luckily it did. It's not like I just came home and things fell into place. I mean, I spent 2 months meticulously working through, figuring out how I was going to travel. I knew nothing about this, and it was not smooth. I had like a couple bad skin breakouts in that period. A lot of it still stress. And I think witnessing my own transformation of how this whole journey, which stemmed from taking that leap of faith on my intuition to follow this path that felt right to me, and knowing from that low point to that peace, like I feel like these statistics which we mentioned, 8 in 10 people dissatisfied, like 1 in 3 college students have felt so depressed. These statistics are clearly showing that there's a problem in our culture. And I felt like the most powerful way to inspire someone is never to tell them what to do, but just to show what worked for you or share your own experiences, like the power of a story. And so that was what it was about for me. And, I had a lot of different experiences and lessons learned from people's travels. Like the book is essentially, I share the experiences and I share the lessons of incredible people I meet. And then it's kind of like I explain, like how I interpreted those experiences.
Sure.
But there was a moment about halfway through the trip. I had met this man in this town in a region called Lake Atitlan. He was like a humanitarian. He grew up in the times of the genocide in an indigenous tribe and has this incredible story of triumph over tragedy. And I met him, and he told me he spends his nights like going to this rural, remote village on the other side of the mountain, like feeding the sick and the poor. A lot of them are orphans he found sleeping in coffee plants. And like he did this, he didn't really sleep a lot of nights. Like he would sleep for like maybe 3-4 hours in the mornings from like, 4 or 5 in the morning till, 8 or 9 or whatever. And I was like, how do you do this? And he said, like, why don't you come with me tomorrow during the day, and I want you to see how these people live. And so the next day I went with him on his little motorbike, and we left the touristy town and, less and less people, rocky roads. And after 20 minutes, we pull up to this like opening, and there was like these 15 feet by 15 feet width and length, like cylinder block huts. And it was very quiet. And I went with him, and I asked him if I could pass out stickers while he passed out like food and money, because I had brought stickers on my travels to give out to kids, and I used them as incentives teaching English. And he said, of course, of course. And we're approaching this first hut, and as we're about to enter, we noticed like 3 young boys standing outside a little bit to the left, and they must have been 7 or 8. None of them were wearing shoes. Their clothes were covered in dirt. And they didn't really look happy or sad. This was interesting. Like they were just completely unemotional. It was like this stoic, unemotional stillness. And the guy Arnulfo he greets them in this Mayan language. Like they didn't even speak Spanish, in this like clicks and clacks language. And then I'm like, yeah, can I give them the stickers? He said, yeah, of course. So I give them the stickers. Like I pull out my backpack, give them some strips, and I mean the difference between that moment of unemotional stillness on their faces to this like euphoric joy. I mean, they were like all of a sudden giggling and laughing and putting the stickers on each other's faces and like reflecting it in the sun's light. I was like, what just happened? I mean, the fact that a sticker could do this, and of course, they're kids. I'm breaking the ice. Now they're a little more comfortable around me. But like we did that for the next hour, like going around, and the same experience happened with all these kids. And as we left, I remember thinking like, it wasn't the sticker, but it was the idea that A, someone cares enough to do this. The sticker represents that, and B, I started thinking about like the potential that I had within me and that everyone has within themselves to make a difference in someone's life. And I remember thinking like, how can I use what I know and what I have to make a difference in people's lives, also in my own country? Like it was just this total like epiphany of, oh my goodness, like what can I do to be of value and service to people?
Mm-hmm.
And I get back to the town and I meet up with my friends and they're like, yeah, there's this cacao ceremony nearby. Let's, do you want to come with us? And I didn't really know. And traveling for me was kind of about accepting some of these open experiences with an open mind. So I said, sure, what the heck? And we approached this guy's cottage, and there's this world-renowned cacao shaman who apparently, like, cacao, by the way, is just the purest form of chocolate.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so apparently this guy would help, through cacao, he would help people uncover, like, traumatic experiences and help them, like, have these profound realizations. That was kind of like the hype for it. And I get there, and this guy looks like a 6'6" skinny version of Dumbledore, times like straight out of The Hobbit, like long wispy white hair down to his back, like circular glasses, like a psychedelic T-shirt. I mean, it was like we went back to Woodstock. Not that I was there, but
I was like, nice reference.
Like. Yeah, and like maybe 30 people, young and old, dreadlocks, beads, crystals, and some people were just like us, like they had never done anything like this. And so he passes out these cacao drinks, and they tasted kind of gross, like very bitter.
Because cacao does not taste like good, yummy chocolate.
Exactly. Like this was no like chocolate galore. I mean, it was cacao. I'm going to use a different word here. But yeah, it felt like an espresso, a couple of shots of espresso, nothing psychedelic. Mm-hmm. But he starts going through these exercises, and some people are opening up about their own experiences. And then about an hour or so into it, he says, we're going to do this thing called glow meditation. And he guided everyone to just close their eyes and to smile and create their own happiness and to imagine this ball of white euphoric light. And of course, like, I remember thinking this is the cheesiest thing ever. Like, I'm like, what is like, and I remember everyone began, and I'm the one with my eyes open, like looking around at all these people with their eyes closed and like these big smiles. I'm like, where am I? But he kept saying, like, fake it till you make it. It's okay if you're fake smiling, but just keep trying. And so, of course, I tune in and I'm doing that. And I have that, like, when you say cheese for too long and you have that like plasticky feeling in your cheek?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had that, but he kept saying, like, fake it till you make it. And then all of a sudden I had this vision, and I saw myself standing on a stage. Like, it was very specific. I was wearing a white shirt, and there was like an MC who introduced me and praising this book that I wrote and how it was inspiring people to like overcome their struggles and take the leap of faith to pursue the life that really called out to them. And it was in that moment, like, it felt so real. Like, it was like every ounce of my being felt like I was there. And I knew that the events that happened that day with Arnulfo and the kids and the stickers, coupled with the realizations I'd been having and this transformation from my own low place to this, sense of wonder and peace and exploration, like, the book was just a purpose-driven mission now. It wasn't just an idea. And I committed to doing that. And so this kind of ties back to your original question is I knew at the end of my trip that I was going to write this book, and I was so committed to from this vision. Like, it was so crystal clear that I knew it was going to happen. It was just a means of figuring out how.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense. I kind of figured that's, because part of your story really is what I see about you online as well, and you can just hear this through you, so you do want to share your experiences. It's not that you have all the answers, but you want to help. I'm going to go back to the word I said earlier, awareness. It's all these people that don't have the awareness that you want to help them see there's a possibility, there's a way to change it, become more, see what you don't know. I'm curious about, as you share your stories and your experiences, do you aim specifically toward, even other people that are similar to your age, that are young, that are maybe going through that same sort of anxiety or depression, or someone who might be able to relate to you in that kind of, I don't want to say just age bracket, but maybe that time of life?
Yeah, I think, like, for example, from a speaking perspective, like tomorrow, actually, I speak to a senior class. And I always try and hone in on a lot of the things that that you feel as an adolescent or in your young 20s of the uncertainty. But interestingly enough, from a book perspective, I've gotten a lot of people who are much older than me who said the book really spoke to them. Mm. And at first I was like, when you're writing a book, you want to figure out your target market. And I was kind of struggling and then this woman gave me this great answer. She said, until life kicks you in the teeth, you're not ready to kind of like see this path, I guess, that I've been fascinated by going down, maybe a mindful path or a path of curiosity. And I think a lot of young people do have those things, but a lot of people don't care when you're young, like you're caught up in the party scene. So
Yeah.
it really depends. Like there are a lot of young people, and especially when I speak, I think I do have a lot of power with high school and college students. Power in the sense of like resonating with them and being able to really speak to them, as opposed to maybe someone who's older. But from a reading standpoint, it's interesting. Like some of the most, feedback that just really like I just couldn't believe like how my words impacted someone came from people in their 50s.
Well, you know what's interesting was why I asked this, because one of the first things this sounds probably really horrible because it sounds like it makes me like I'm thinking so narrowly, because I'm like, yeah, Jake, you're 20, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my first thought was like, you're 20, and I'm sure you probably heard this or thought about this before. Like, maybe you've heard other people even think about like, how much life experience do you really have versus somebody who's 40 or 50, that sort of thing. And I think it's really important to say it, because as we've been talking, I think what I really hear interesting about your story is it's not like you're giving all the answers to life. It's not like you're like, I'm 50, I'm 60, I have this wisdom that only a 60-year-old could have or something. And age doesn't equal wisdom, we know that. But I think what you're saying is that it's about just that awareness, and you have gone and met some really interesting and fascinating people, and you've been in experiences that has opened your eyes, and you're just sharing that knowledge that anybody can use no matter your age. It's just about taking that leap of faith and wanting to learn more about your why. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. And it's funny.
It's like I'm pitching your book for you.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I think you've used two words that I have, I've done a good amount of like talks with people, and you've used, one word specifically, you keep talking about awareness.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, man, that gets me going, like, just because I think awareness is always the first step to any sort of change, whether it's awareness of your discontent or awareness that you want something else. And of course, that alone is never going to change. You have to take the action, but it always starts with awareness. And it's funny, I actually, when I was thinking of names for my book, the first one I would ever thought about was going to be called like Opening My Eyes or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was going to be called that. And the name of my blog is Eyes Fully Open. And, I just blog about life to try and get people to, be more aware and conscious of their own lives. Because I think, I don't think that everyone has a different life story. And so it's hard for someone, especially for someone like listening, they might be like, I have nothing in common with this kid. But I think the power of a story when you realize it, or just with awareness, is like all humans, we all have different lives, but we have the same emotions, and we all go through those same fears and doubts and insecurities. And so when we can see about how other people move past them, it gives us awareness into our own self and own life.
Yeah, I agree. That's really powerful. I'm curious, who do you look up to? Like, what stories inspire you? You've mentioned a few people that have written some quotes and books and that sort of stuff, which is great. But is there anybody even close to you that you like kind of look into, up to for their stories and their inspiration?
Yeah, well, I mentioned actually two of them. Both Adam Braun and Craig Kielburger are both guys who really inspire me. And Adam Braun founded Pencils of Promise, which is like a for-purpose organization that builds schools around the world in developing countries. And I think what fascinates me about him is, I guess I actually felt a lot of similarities to his story. Like we both grew up Jewish, both had grandparents who survived the Holocaust, and both had this opportunity to go down great career paths. And he was in a corporate job at I think it was Bain or something, a big Wall Street firm, and he was he had no passion for what he was doing. And while he was backpacking, I think it was through Laos. It was like in India, he asked a kid, if they could have anything in the world, what they would want. And he said a pencil. And that, that was the whole shift of everything for him, because he realized like how, he had taken his education, not for granted, but he saw how so many kids around the world just didn't even have access to it. And to see how he left his unfulfilling path, kind of despite what other people thought, and created this powerful organization that is not only changing millions of students' lives, but also the way businesses run. I mean, he's created this whole for-purpose model of doing business and inspiring young people. And to see him do that at a relatively young age and reading his story, I felt just so empowered to continue down my path. And he actually has a quote that I've shared when I spoke at a college, and I shared it. It's the single most powerful element of youth is in our inability to know what is possible, which, we talked about my own naivete. And it's kind of true. Like, even with the book, like, I ended up getting my book to like Jack Canfield and Drew Brees, who's an NFL quarterback, and, Chris Gilbo, New York Times, and not, Drew Brees never gave me an endorsement, but it was like, I was so naive about like I was like, I'm just going to go to Drew's house and ask him. And people are like, oh, you can't do that. I was like, why not? Like, I'll just see what happens. And so like that just inability to know, and like, oh yeah, like I'm going to write a book. And I didn't know. And like, oh my gosh, thank goodness I didn't know what it was going to take, because it was a lot more work than I had figured. But just kind of like pursuing the things that called out to us and not worrying so much about all the, negatives, but focusing on the potential and impact, just like Adam did. It's just been inspiring for me to see what he's created and how he's, tapped into his own youth and, willingness to make a difference.
You made a lot of good points there. I'm going to point out just one little small one that you said, because like I said, you said so many great things. There's one piece that you said about your book, like, you didn't know how much work it was going to be. That, I think, is the truth about a lot of things. If we all really knew how much effort or how the turmoil or the challenges that we would have in anything that we want to pursue, some greatness, we may not actually do it if we actually knew what it was going to take, because a lot of great things take work. And so I think I just didn't want to miss that point, because I think it's super powerful, even if it wasn't a key point there. It's just look at where you've come now, like, from having all these, these worries, anxiety, skin, to seeing parts of the world you'd never thought you'd see, to meeting these people, to today sharing a story, I think it's really powerful. And who knew it'd take so much time and effort, but look at it, how excited you are now about talking about it. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I definitely agree. And it's funny because I'm sort of in a period right now again where, I've originally, when I was getting asked these questions, like, I've been so focused on getting this book out. Essentially, it was like from the time of that vision in that cacao ceremony, and then I released the book a couple weeks ago. It was crazy because that vision guided me to the night I spoke at my book launch party. And remember, I mentioned I was wearing a white shirt. I wore a white shirt
Sure.
intentionally, and like shared that part. And of course, that was fun. But I was so focused on that and getting it out. And now it's kind of like I'm sitting with the unknown. Like, I don't plan on going back to university, and I'm really fortunate to be getting some speaking gigs and getting to share these messages I would do for free anyways to high schools and colleges. But I don't totally know what's next, and I'm sitting with the unknown again. But from what I've learned, and like what you just said, like, if we knew how much work it would take, and if we knew all the answers, like, life would be boring and we would never end up pursuing all these things. So it's kind of like this, it's like this pulling from both polars, right? Like, we equally want to know and we hate uncertainty, but at the same time, we in a weird intuitive way, we love it because it's what makes life interesting. So I'm again back in this process, don't have the answers of what I'm going to be doing right next, but I kind of just need to sit and take some time to tune in again and think about what would call out to me and how I can manifest some of these ideas into the world.
I think that's actually a perfect way to even wrap that up, because I think that's perfect advice to everybody else, is to keep asking the what, the why, and really look into that, what calls to you, and follow that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it.
As I always like to just, make sure that people can find you and find the information you're sharing. So what's the best place online, even if there are multiple places, but where can people follow along, either get in touch, read about your book, read about your blogs, whatever?
Yeah, so my name is Jake Heilbrunn, and my last name is kind of a tough one. It's Heilbrunn. And so my website is just jakeheilbrunn.com, all my social media stuff. And from there, I have tons of blog articles. And also the book is on Amazon, and you could also get it from my site. And that's called Off the Beaten Trail, A Young Man's Soul-Searching Journey Through Central America.
That's great. And we'll make sure that we add all of that to the show notes and to the website so people can share and get to know more about you. Jake, this has been great. It's really fascinating. Because I had a lot of questions after I, read about you, and I just wanted to know even the deeper parts of it. So I think you've done a great job at kind of sharing how your story can come to life and how it relates differently to other people. It's great.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. I mean, I had such a good time talking. You ask pretty incredible and fascinating questions.
It's
So
because
you
I'm very inquisitive. That's why.
yeah, well, it's a great trait to be, as an interviewer. So I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
that probably makes sense. Thanks, Jake. Now, over to you. Any thoughts or questions you'd like to share? Seriously, do you have any questions you'd like to ask me or the guest? We'll answer them and even get the guest to help us. So send us a message, use our Facebook page and email us there, or post a comment or question on the page, or tweet us at accidentalinfo using hashtag LivingYourJourney. You can find out more about all the guests, links to their sites and social channels, and even bonus content all at accidentalinformation.com. Now, a couple favors. Go subscribe to the show and you'll be the first to get the download before everyone else. Also, take just a couple moments and head over to the show in iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a quick review. Quick, easy, and I would love it. This totally supports us and it helps me bring in interesting guests each week and keeps the show going. Also, I love to read them and see what you guys are really thinking. Thanks for joining the conversation, and remember, Living Your Journey is available every Tuesday. Until next week.